Hello, good morning. I'm here to talk to you about my future city. And from here in my title, you might think my future city looks like this. Autonomous vehicles, sensors, data, robots doing everything. And indeed, I spend some of my day thinking a lot about this, especially as we think a lot about smart cities and what we're heading towards in terms of the city. But when I was asked to do this talk, I was asked to do something a little bit more personal, and asked to talk a little bit not about work, and to talk a little bit about what I think about outside of work. And so I went a little bit outside my comfort zone, and I was asked what I was thinking about at that point in time, into which I responded, food. I am constantly thinking about food, actually. I always think about eating. In fact, as I'm standing here, literally, I'm thinking about what I'm having for lunch and dinner and breakfast the next day. And not to be trite or not, but I do think food is fundamental to a lot of our well-being and our development. It's very hard to go through Maslow's hierarchy of self-attainment and self-actualization if you're hungry. And as we learn from history, we know that when governments fail to provide food, when grain prices get too high, when agriculture fails, when our basic necessity is not fulfilled, governments topple. People get upset. We're not fulfilled in the most basic need. And so food is very fundamental to my well-being and to my core, and it's very much a part of who I think of myself and my identity, and what I eat as a Chinese American, and how I feed my baby in terms of breast milk and breastfeeding, and also to just my family and myself. We've become so good about food and technology, though, that we've kind of looked into a dystopia about food. And when we think about food in the future, it kind of goes and looks like this in a Wall-E type society where food and technology in the future is warped into a crazy universe. Now, I don't agree with this type of dystopia, but I do think that food has kind of transformed itself in the future, where it's more of a distraction. Are you familiar with Soylent? You guys familiar? So basically, this came out of Silicon Valley, and it allows us with a powdery drink where we will no longer have to actually chew food for the rest of our lives if we wanted to. I won't discuss the taste or the affordability of it, but there's a fundamental premise that's different than the Wall-E actualization. We actually don't want to become lazy. We actually want to become more productive in the future. So productive to the point where food is distracting. So the fundamental idea behind Soylent is that if I decrease the amount of time it takes around eating or preparing or cleaning around food, I will become more productive. And if I am more productive, I will be happier. And therefore, food is more of a distraction, right? And while we aren't really thinking about, drinking powdery drinks all day, we do something like this, where we are trying to do a million things at the same time, and food is just some sort of thing that kind of is something we have to do. Most of us, as studies have revealed, 65% plus eat in front of our computer each day, and continue doing whatever else we have to do because of time suck. But are we actually pressed for time when it comes to eating and when it comes to food? Can you guess actually how long we spend eating each day? Any guesses? Yeah? So the Bureau of Labor Statistics did this extensive American time use survey. And they said, on average, the primary activity that we spend each day eating is 1 hour and 8 minutes. Now you say, well, there's like cooking and cleaning and preparation of food, and that takes some time too. Add 34 minutes to it. That is the total amount of time that we spend each day around food. We actually spend more time watching TV about possibly food or making food at 2 hours and 30 minutes than food itself. And we're actually one of the, on average, lowest averages among OECD countries in the world. So we are an exception when we think about food. So even if I grant you that there is a time saved around food, you are saving a little over 1 hour each day. Here's my big idea. I think about food beyond the biological benefits, and I actually think that there's a lot to come around eating and thinking about eating together. What if we spent some time each day eating together? What if we actually thought about the community that involves eating together? Now, this big idea is not something that is profound in a sense. The notion of breaking bread actually has a lot of historic and even biblical history in terms. Suddenly, when I sit down with someone and break bread, the other no longer becomes the other. It's much easier to communicate when we are sitting down and seeing each other eye to eye and doing something very common. It's a self-realization that actually flips Maslow's hierarchy upside down. And there's been numerous studies that actually talk about just the value of just eating together and how that could make us actually happier in terms of that correlation because of that communication. Now, of course, I'm not here to advocate, we're all going to live in a Willy Wonka chocolate factory style where we're just going to be gluttonous and, just eat and eat and eat. Nor am I saying that this has nothing to do with technology or the advancement of our society or life or whatnot. And in fact, I think technology can help us in eating together. And it can empower us to eating together and to be thinking about this. But we cannot be defined by technology through food. It can only enhance. So there's a couple of things that I just want to show you. One is just typical transforming food waste. I couldn't do this without, talking about some local pride, about thinking about how we think about food and our waste. But there's a lot of interesting applications that have been developed around food. One is called a leftover swap. So it's basically if I make a big pot of soup and there's extra soup, I can actually share that soup. And there's applications that allow you to do that. Or if I'm hungry and I see that someone's making a big pot of soup, I can connect. So neighbor-to-neighbor connection. Very changing the thing about food, turning waste into community building, into relationship. Just another example, thinking about food on demand, food economy. Lots of different applications. You may be familiar with Uber. You may be familiar with other applications, but whenever you travel, instead of looking at Yelp or Zagat's, you can actually get a home-cooked meal somewhere else and actually learn about that person's culture, learn about the food that they're making through some of this travel. Or you can actually spur about food about entrepreneurship with local incubators, with food trucks, with suddenly tapping into the global market. These are not profound ideas. The technology already exists. And in fact, the technology is getting better that allows us to connect. Nor am I saying that this thing is very difficult in terms of the big ideas. But I do think ultimately the big idea rests on us thinking about how we think about time and how we think about eating and how we think about eating with each other and eating together. So my future city is not necessarily just your typical smart city. My future city is thinking about smart eating and smart eating together. Thank you.